You've heard of Saint Christopher, right? The guy on that medal your grandma gave you. The one people clip to their car keys, hang from their mirrors, or wear around their neck when they travel. Yeah, that's Saint Christopher. But here's something nobody told you in Sunday school. Before he ever carried Christ across that river, he tried to serve Satan. No joke. This giant of a man, literally a giant, went on a wild journey looking for the most powerful master in the world. And for a while, he thought it was the devil. Crazy, right? But here's the thing. This isn't just a spooky campfire story or some forgotten piece of church trivia. This is one of the most fascinating redemption arcs you'll ever hear. Because what happens next? It'll flip the whole legend of Saint Christopher on its head, and might even change how you see your own spiritual journey. Stick around, this is one you're going to want to hear all the way through. Alright, before we dive into this wild story, we need to get something straight. Saint Christopher isn't just some background saint you gloss over in a church-stained glass window. He's a big deal. Like, literally and figuratively. Millions of people around the world, Catholics, Orthodox, even non-religious folks, wear Saint Christopher medals for protection. You'll see them in backpacks, suitcases, motorcycles, even inside car dashboards. He's known as the patron saint of travelers, the one who's got your back when you're crossing land, sea, or life's more unpredictable terrain. But here's where things get interesting. Despite his massive popularity, the actual historical record of Saint Christopher is really thin. In fact, most of what we know about him doesn't come from formal church documents or Roman history, comes from legend. And I don't mean legend like some medieval bedtime story. I mean legend in the traditional Christian sense, oral tradition, stories passed down from early believers, especially in the Eastern Church, meant to preserve the spiritual truth, even when the historical facts are a bit fuzzy. Now, according to these accounts, Saint Christopher was alive during the 3rd century, right around the time when Christians were being actively persecuted by the Roman Empire. So already we're talking about a time of chaos, spiritual searching, and high-stakes decisions, the kind of setting where saints are forged. But what makes Christopher stand out from the other early martyrs is how unusual his story is. Most saints start out holy or at least humble. They pray, they heal, they fast. Then they're recognized for their virtue. Not this guy. Christopher, originally known as Reprobus, starts off as this giant, intimidating, warrior-type figure. Not interested in religion, not drawn to prayer or contemplation. His one obsession? Power. He decides he's going to dedicate his life to serving the most powerful ruler he can find. That's it. That's his mission. Not heaven. Not salvation. Just power. And the way that journey unfolds, from Roman kings to the devil himself and finally to Christ, is what makes his story not just legendary, but deeply relatable. Because let's be honest, how many of us start our spiritual journeys chasing strength, success, or security, only to realize we've been serving the wrong master? So if you've ever wondered how a man who once bowed to darkness could become a saint that millions pray to for protection, buckle up. The story of Saint Christopher is about to take a wild turn. So here's where the story of Saint Christopher really kicks off, back when he was still known as Reprobus. And listen, this wasn't just some ordinary guy going through a spiritual phase. According to the oldest traditions, Reprobus was a giant, literally. Some say he was over 7 feet tall with the strength of 10 men. He was intimidating, commanding, and honestly, not someone you'd want to run into alone on a road in the middle of nowhere. But what's interesting is that, even with all that physical strength, he wasn't satisfied. He didn't want to just be strong, he wanted to serve strength. He was looking for someone or something worthy of his loyalty. And so begins what's probably the most unusual job search in saint history. Reprobus decides, I will only serve the greatest king on earth, the one who fears no one, the one who's subservient to no one. Eventually, he finds himself in the court of a mighty earthly king, a powerful ruler with lands, soldiers, and influence. And Reprobus thinks, all right, this is it. This is my guy. But it doesn't take long for the cracks to show. One day, while this king is holding court, a musician performs a song that mentions the devil, and the king visibly winces, like actually flinches. Reprobus notices. Later, he asks the king, why did you react like that? Why do you look afraid whenever the devil is mentioned? The king tries to play it off, but eventually admits, I fear him. The devil holds power I can't match. And that's all Reprobus needs to hear. If you fear the devil, he says, then you're not the strongest. I want to serve him instead. Just like that, he walks out. And so now Reprobus seeks out the devil himself. Now obviously, this part of the story is meant to be symbolic. But the message is clear. Reprobus actually chooses to serve Satan, believing he's found the ultimate master. And he does. For a time, Reprobus follows a dark path. He aligns himself with evil. He lives among those who reject God, thinking he's finally found the power he was looking for. But, spoiler alert, Satan's reign isn't exactly all it's cracked up to be. One day, as they're traveling together, they come to a crossroads, and on the side of the path is a simple wooden cross, a Christian symbol, and Satan stops, refuses to go near it. Reprobus is confused. Why are you hesitating? Satan doesn't answer directly, but it's obvious. He's afraid of the cross. And just like that, Reprobus puts it all together. If Satan fears the cross, then Christ must be more powerful. Boom! The illusion shatters. And in that moment, the giant warrior who thought he had found the ultimate source of strength realizes he's still searching. He leaves Satan behind. Not because he suddenly became holy or had a magical vision, but because he followed logic. Because he reasoned that if he was going to serve the most powerful master, it had to be someone stronger than fear, stronger than death, stronger than evil itself. And so begins the next chapter of his life, the journey to find Christ. So at this point in the story, Reprobus is riding high. He thinks he's done it, found the ultimate master in Satan. The one who isn't afraid of any king, doesn't answer to any authority, and rules with fear and dominance. But what happens next? This is the moment that flips everything. The moment that cracks Satan's armor and opens Reprobus's eyes. According to the ancient accounts, and again, these are wrapped in legend but meant to carry truth. Reprobus and the devil are traveling together, passing through towns and forests, spreading chaos as they go. Then, one day, they're walking along a road when they come across something seemingly small. A simple wooden cross planted by the path. Just a cross. Nothing elaborate. No church, no angels descending from the sky. Just a Christian symbol probably left behind by a passing believer. And Satan stops dead in his tracks. Won't go near it. Refuses to take another step. Now Reprobus, being a no-nonsense kind of guy, immediately picks up on it. Why are we stopping? Satan doesn't answer. What's wrong? Still nothing. So finally, Reprobus just asks the question. Why are you afraid of that? After some pressing, Satan admits he fears the one who died on that cross. And that's it. That's the moment everything changes. For the first time, Reprobus realizes Satan isn't the top of the chain. There's someone above him. Someone even Satan can't touch. And what really hits Reprobus isn't just that Satan is afraid. It's who he's afraid of. Not a warlord. Not a king. Not a bigger demon. But a man who died on a cross. A man who, to the eyes of the world, looked like he had lost. And yet somehow, this crucified man still holds a power that sends Satan running. That realization doesn't come with thunder or lightning or divine visions. It comes quietly, like a truth that settles deep into your bones. And it leaves Reprobus shaken. Because if Christ has that kind of power, the kind that strikes fear into the heart of evil itself, then he must be the one worthy of service. And here's the genius of this turning point. Reprobus isn't converting because someone convinced him with a sermon, or because he saw a miracle. He's converting because he followed reason. He looked at the fear in Satan's eyes, and chose to walk toward what Satan feared most. That's not just bravery, that's clarity. In a way, Reprobus becomes a mirror for all of us. How often do we chase after what looks powerful? Success, control, status, only to find that deep down those things are hollow. That they still bow to something else, something greater. And when we finally reach that crossroad, when we see what evil is afraid of, do we keep walking the same way? Or do we turn around and follow the one who holds true power? Reprobus made his choice. He left the devil behind, and he set out to find Christ. Not because of fear, but because for the first time he had seen where real strength comes from. And that's the strength he would later carry on his shoulders. So now we've reached a major turning point in Reprobus's story. The guy who once served Satan, the literal embodiment of darkness, has just turned his back on him. Why? Because even the devil trembles at the name of Christ. And Reprobus? He wants to serve no one but the greatest. So what does he do? Well, he sets off in search of this mysterious figure, Christ, whom he's never met, never read about, never prayed to. You've got to understand, this isn't like us Googling how to become a Christian. This is the 3rd century. No Bibles lying around. No churches on every corner. No YouTube homilies. Just word of mouth. And the occasional brave believer hiding from Roman persecution. But Reprobus is determined. And eventually, after traveling across villages and outposts, he comes across a Christian hermit. A man living in solitude, in prayer, hidden from Roman eyes. And he tells him everything. I want to serve this Christ. The one stronger than Satan. The one who wasn't afraid of death. The hermit looks at him, this towering, rough-edged former servant of evil, and says something you might not expect. Then you must fast. And you must pray. Reprobus blinks. That's it. That is how we serve Christ, the hermit says. Through devotion, through obedience, through humility. But Reprobus is confused. No, that's not who I am. I'm not built for that. I'm not a monk. I'm not a thinker. I don't even know how to pray. And right there, this is such a human moment. Because how many of us have said the same thing? I'm not holy enough. I don't fit the mold. I don't have the right background. But the hermit doesn't give up. He studies Reprobus for a minute, sees the strength in him, the size of him, and then he smiles. All right, he says. If you can't pray, then serve in the way you were made to serve. He points toward a wide, wild river nearby. That river floods often. There's no bridge, and people die trying to cross it. Use your strength, carry travelers across it. Help others make it safely to the other side. Serve Christ by serving them. Reprobus nods. No more questions. No hesitation. He gets up and walks straight to the river. And this is where his true journey begins. Day after day, he carries people across. Old men, mothers with children, soldiers, merchants. Rain or sun, night or day, he stands at the riverbank, helping one soul at a time. No sermons, no miracles, no glory, just selfless work, quiet obedience. And honestly, that's one of the most powerful parts of his story. Because Reprobus didn't become holy overnight. He didn't get some magical sainthood pass because he had a cool backstory. He had to live it out, daily. He had to become a servant, even though he had once chased kings. He had to lower himself after years of trying to rise. And in the process, without even realizing it, he was being transformed. The proud giant became a gentle ferryman. The warrior became a helper. The seeker of power became a servant of love. And that's when the next chapter, the most famous moment in his legend, was about to unfold. A child, a mysterious request, and a crossing that would change his name forever. So here he is, Reprobus, the former servant of kings, of Satan, now a humble man standing knee-deep in a raging river, helping strangers cross from one side to the other. Day in, day out, soaked to the bone, sometimes freezing, sometimes scorched by the sun. No applause, no recognition, just the quiet act of service. And it's in this simplicity, this total surrender of ego, that something extraordinary happens. One day, as Reprobus is resting on the riverbank, a small child appears. A boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old. And the child looks up at him with innocent eyes and says, "Will you carry me across?" Reprobus doesn't hesitate. "Of course, little one. Climb on." He hoists the child onto his shoulder, something he's done dozens of times with travelers much heavier. But something's different this time. As he steps into the river, the water seems rougher, stronger. He tightens his grip on the child and pushes forward. A few more steps, and the child starts to feel heavier. Not in the normal way. It's not like he's just tired. This feels like something is pressing down on him, like he's carrying more than just a boy. The further he wades into the river, the heavier the child becomes. Like stone, like iron, like the world itself. Reprobus's knees buckle. His back strains. He's no longer walking, he's fighting every step. The river surges around him. His feet slip on the rocks below. He's carried soldiers. He's carried carts of supplies. He's even carried injured men twice his size. But nothing like this. Halfway across, he gasps, "Child, what are you?" And that's when everything changes. The child, now resting calmly on his shoulder, looks down and says, "You are carrying not just me, but the weight of the world. I am Christ, the one whom you serve." Silence. Time almost stops. And in that moment, Reprobus realizes the full truth. This isn't just any child. This is the Son of God, the very one he had left Satan to find, the one more powerful than kings and demons alike. And now he's sitting on his shoulders. The river, once terrifying, suddenly feels still. The burden, though still heavy, now has meaning. Reprobus, the giant, once full of pride, stands shaking in awe, because he's not just a ferryman anymore. He is now a Christ-bearer. In fact, this is where his name changes. From Reprobus, which means rejected, to Christopher, which literally means Christ-bearer. This is the spiritual turning point where everything about him is transformed. His purpose, his identity, even his name. And the beauty of this moment goes beyond just the miracle. It's symbolic of what every Christian is called to do. To carry Christ, not just on our shoulders, but in our hearts. To move through life's rivers, through its chaos, weight, and storms. And keep going because the one we carry is the one who carries us. Now here's the part that often gets overlooked. After this event, Christopher doesn't run off to become a celebrity saint or miracle worker. He keeps doing exactly what he was doing before. He goes back to the river, keeps helping people, keeps serving. But now, everything is different. Because once you've carried Christ, nothing in your life is ordinary anymore. That river isn't just a river. That service isn't just labor. It's all become sacred. And isn't that the beauty of sainthood? It's not about glowing halos or walking on water. It's about obedience, quiet strength, service done when nobody's watching. That's what makes Saint Christopher so relatable, especially for those of us just trying to live our faith in the real world. He didn't start as a preacher or a prophet. He started as a man chasing power and became a man who carried God himself. Not because he was perfect, but because he was willing to change, willing to serve, and willing to carry the weight, even when it nearly crushed him. And that's why to this day, travelers, soldiers, even athletes, people constantly crossing metaphorical and literal rivers, turn to Saint Christopher, because he reminds us that carrying Christ isn't easy, but it's exactly where true strength is found. After the miraculous moment in the river, after Reprobus became Christopher, the Christ-bearer, you might think his story ends there. A perfect spiritual transformation, a moment of divine revelation. Roll credits, right? But no, Saint Christopher's life didn't stop at the miracle. In fact, it was just getting harder, because becoming a saint, becoming someone who carries Christ, means more than just having a powerful encounter. It means living it out, even when it costs you everything. And for Christopher, it would cost him his life. So here's what happens next. After the river, Christopher continues his work. He keeps helping people, still acting as a ferryman, but now he also begins sharing the gospel. He doesn't do it like a scholar or theologian, he just speaks plainly from experience. "I once served the devil," he tells people, "but I found the one stronger than him, and he changed everything." And because Christopher was real, not some polished preacher, people listened. Stories began spreading. People started coming just to meet him, to ask questions, to seek prayer. And that's when things start to get dangerous. You've got to remember, this is still the Roman Empire, a time when being openly Christian wasn't just frowned upon. It was illegal. And word of Christopher's influence eventually reaches the ears of a local Roman governor. one who was loyal to Emperor Decius or possibly Emperor Maximinus II, depending on the version of the story. Either way, the empire was cracking down on Christians hard at this time. And when they heard about a massive man, a former warrior, not just converting but now bringing others to Christ, that was seen as a threat. So the governor sends for Christopher, not to immediately punish him, but to bribe him. And here's a detail that's both fascinating and disturbing. According to the legend, the governor sent two beautiful women to try and seduce Christopher. His plan was simple: break his moral resolve, and then use that shame to force him to renounce his faith. But Christopher doesn't flinch. Instead, he preaches to them. He tells them about Christ, about the cross, about forgiveness and mercy and truth. And get this, they convert. The governor's plan backfires completely. Now even the ones sent to tempt him are becoming Christians. So, of course, the governor turns to force. Christopher is arrested. And here's where things take a brutal turn. He's offered one last chance: deny Christ or face torture. And like so many of the early Christian martyrs, he refuses. So they beat him. They whip him. In some versions of the story, they place a red-hot iron helmet on his head. In others, they tie him to a post and try to burn him alive, but the flames don't harm him. There's even an account that they pierced him with iron rods, trying to make him feel fear. But he never wavered. It's not just physical strength anymore. The spiritual conviction. And finally, when none of the torture worked, when he refused to betray the one he now served, they sentenced him to death by beheading. And that's how Saint Christopher's earthly life ended. Not in the glory of a public parade. Not in recognition and praise. But in blood. In silence. In martyrdom. And yet, this is where sainthood begins. Because the early church remembered him. They passed down his story, not just the miracle of carrying Christ, but the sacrifice of staying faithful. His name spread from village to village, then across continents. Travelers began praying for his protection. Soldiers wore medals with his image. Parents taught their children his story. And eventually, the church recognized what the people already believed in their hearts. This man was a saint. Now, here's where some clarification is helpful. Unlike modern saints who go through a formal canonization process with investigations, miracles, and Vatican paperwork, Saint Christopher is what we call a pre-congregation saint. That means he was recognized as a saint by the early church, long before the official canonization system existed. His veneration dates back to the 4th century, maybe even earlier. Churches were built in his honor. Feasts were celebrated in his name. And his legacy? It only grew stronger with time. Even though some scholars today debate the historicity of parts of his story, the church still honors the truth behind the legend. A man who gave up worldly power to follow Christ. A man who used his strength not to conquer but to carry. A man who stood tall in his faith, even when it cost him everything. That's why his name is still spoken today. That's why his medal hangs around the necks of travelers, soldiers, police officers, athletes, and everyday believers. Because Saint Christopher reminds us, faith is not about being perfect. It's about being willing. Willing to change. Willing to serve. And willing to stay faithful, even when the world says walk away. And that right there is the legacy of the Christ-bearer. So, what happened after Saint Christopher died? You might think that, over time, his story would fade into the background, just another name among the long list of early martyrs. But actually, the opposite happened. His legend didn't just survive, it thrived. Stories of the giant who carried Christ and died for his faith began spreading across Europe, the Middle East, and eventually the world. And long before most people could read scripture for themselves, they heard the story of Saint Christopher. Not just as a lesson in strength or obedience, but as a symbol of protection, loyalty, and courage. That's why, even today, his image is everywhere. You've probably seen it yourself. A man with a staff, often wading through water, carrying a small child on his shoulder. That's Saint Christopher. It's in stained glass windows, carved into wood, printed on prayer cards, molded into keychains, coins, and of course, the famous Saint Christopher medal. For centuries, Catholics and Orthodox Christians alike have worn that medal as a sign of protection, especially when traveling. And it's not just tradition. It's a quiet prayer, a physical reminder. Lord, walk with me, carry me, as Christopher once carried you. That's why his legacy still speaks so loudly today. Because he wasn't some unreachable mystic or a cloistered monk. He was a man of action. A man who used the tools he had, his size, his strength, his determination, and offered them up in service to God. That's why soldiers wear his medal. Why truck drivers, pilots, and backpackers keep it close. Because they see something in him that reflects their own lives. The long journeys, the dangers, the responsibility of carrying others. And here's something really beautiful. Even though some parts of his story are clearly legendary, the truth behind the legend still matters. The Church, in her wisdom, doesn't venerate saints just because every detail is historically verifiable. She recognizes them for what they represent, for how God's grace can work through flawed, surprising, even wild individuals. And in Saint Christopher we see that clearly. A man who once served darkness, now standing as a light for millions. A man who carried Christ, and now helps us carry him too. His feast day is traditionally celebrated on July 25th in the Roman Catholic calendar, though it was removed from the Universal Liturgical Calendar in 1969. Not because the Church rejected him, but because his story is more devotional than strictly historical. But make no mistake, Saint Christopher is still recognized as a saint, and his popular veneration is alive and well. So the next time you see his image or wear that medal, remember, this isn't just a symbol of safe travel. It's a reminder that strength is meant for service, that faith sometimes walks through rivers, and that even those who once wandered far from God can become bearers of Christ. So what do we take from all of this? Saint Christopher wasn't born a saint. He didn't grow up in a holy family or study scripture from a young age. He was a man who sought power, who served darkness, who made mistakes, and yet he became one of the most beloved saints in the world. Why? Because when the truth hit him, he changed. He humbled himself. He chose service over strength. And in doing so, he found the one worth carrying, and carried him all the way to the end. His life reminds us that no one is too far gone, no story too messy, and maybe most importantly, that you don't have to be perfect to carry Christ, you just have to be willing. So if this story moved you, if it challenged or inspired you, let us know in the comments. Would you have had the courage to walk away from everything like Christopher did? Drop a thought below, give this video a like if it spoke to you, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. And hey, wherever you're headed next, may Saint Christopher walk with you.